Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Phil Koulis. This is The Time of the Signs, a pre-Trumpets study of the book of Revelation. In today's episode, what I'd like to do is go over some of the things that we covered earlier. In the first episode, we talked about the Revelation roadmap. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we covered already. The first episode, we talked about the Revelation roadmap, which was a discussion of the seals, trumpets, and bowls, and how they are organized within the book of Revelation to provide a continuous timeline through the book. The first thing that we looked at was the scroll, which is typically depicted as being sealed with 7 seals along the leading edge. But that particular visualization method prevents the scroll from being opened until all the seals are opened. The second method that we talked about matches the scripture, and it says that Jesus is found worthy to open the scroll and loose its seals. So in this method, the seals are internal within the scroll, and it allows the scroll to be unwound in sequential order, and a restraint is provided by every single seal at a different interval within the opening of the scroll. We also talked about the trumpets, how the trumpets are nested within the 7th seal, and then also the trumpets sequence is reinforced by the 3 woes which are announced, and then also the 7 bowls, which are literally labeled as the 7 last. In the second episode, I talked about what I call roadmap rivets, which is the expression meta tauta, which means after this. And in that, I demonstrated by riveting together 2 pieces of leather, and you can see where that's fastened together, where you have after these things. So you have a sequence of events, and they're in sequence, and that vocabulary grammar meaning of after this and after these things actually provides a continuity in addition to the seals, trumpets, bowls, and woes. There was also a mention of 63 occasions of the word then, and the word then actually provides a continuity between individual events. Then this happened, then that happened, meaning that there is a before and after of these things. And this is 63 times throughout the entire Revelation. So you can see that there is a sequence of events that occur. In the third episode, I talked about a game we played called Pin the Tail on the Antichrist. And Pin the Tail on the Antichrist was basically taking a look at the criteria for the character known as the Antichrist, and then comparing those characteristics to the 2 candidates for that particular character. One of the candidates was the white horse rider who appears in the first seal of chapter 6, and the second candidate was Apollyon, the beast from the pit, who appears in chapter 9 at the 5th trumpet. And it's important to note that in that discussion, Apollyon scored 6 out of 7, whereas the white horse rider scored 0 out of 7 as far as meeting the criteria for the Antichrist. The reason this is important is it sets up the discussion for this video. So all these things happen in a sequential order, and by comparing the criteria of the Antichrist to the characters who are candidates for the Antichrist, we find that the white horse rider is not the Antichrist. And so when we look at the first couple of scenarios, we have basically 3 main scenarios plus the scenario that I'm presenting. And the first 3 scenarios are the pre, the mid, and the post trib. And I use the word trib in parentheses because it's a slang for the word tribulation. And the word tribulation itself does not define a specific measured period of time that we're talking about. We're talking about the 70th week of Daniel. And the 70th week of Daniel is a very specific 7-year period of time, which is measured in half weeks of years. It's measured in, the half weeks are measured in 42 months. It's also measured in 1,260 and 1,290 days for a total of 2,550 days. And we'll find out later with something that I'm going to present that 2,550 days is a very, very interesting occurrence in a number of days as it applies to some upcoming feasts of Israel. So let's just jump right into this. What I want to show you first is the slide that applies to both the pre and the post-trib scenarios. And if you look at this, you'll see that the white arrow at the top represents the 7-year 70th week of Daniel. The green arrow represents the seals, the yellow arrow represents the trumpets, and the red arrow represents the bowls. According to the pre and post views, all the seals, trumpets, and bowls happen concurrently in parallel at the same time and all within a brief 7-year period. You can see prior to that the 69 weeks of years which led up to the Messiah, and when Messiah was executed for a covenant, and that started the church age. We are currently in the church age. And you'll notice that the blue arrow on the left is where the pre-trib rapture scenario indicates that the rapture is going to happen. And that is also indicated, you'll see a picture of a character on a white horse with a bow. That's our white horse rider character who arrives at the first seal in chapter 6. Now the pre-trib view sees that the entire 70th week happens within chapter 6. And when it gets to chapter 7, they say that it starts all over again, and the trumpets and the bowls are happening at the same time, and that the trumpets and the bowls are a different telling of the same events, or even telling of different events that happen on top of or at the same time. I'm not sure exactly how they work that, but to me it makes absolutely no sense. Now you'll notice at the far right, you'll see a blue arrow which indicates the post-trib view. And it's been my finding that a lot of people who are of the post-trib view were formerly of the pre-trib view. I've noticed quite a few people who have changed over their views because they get to chapter 7 and they see a rapture scenario. And they see an uncountable multitude standing before the throne of God with palm branches in their hand. They're from every nation, tribe, language, and tongue, and they're standing around going, "Hoorah, we're saved." Well, that's what we're all looking for. That's what we want. That is our quote-unquote blessed hope that so many people talk about. Now, they'll say that these are they're martyred saints, but from the 21 things that I've been able to determine about that multitude in chapter 7, there's nothing to indicate that they're martyred. So the idea that they're martyred saints and this happens at the end of the 70th week doesn't hold much water either. The pre-trib people, on the other hand, will say that the rapture occurred when John is taken up into heaven in chapter 4. However, the big problem that they have is they don't have what is clearly visible in chapter 7. They don't have a multitude of saints in heaven proclaiming salvation. So what they'll say is they'll say, well, John represents the church. And then they'll say, well, the elders represent the church. But there's case to be made that neither one of those are true. In fact, the church is not seen in chapter 4, and this is why so many people that were formerly of a pre-trib view see the multitude in chapter 7. They base the fact that they believe the white horse rider is the Antichrist, and then they'll say, well, that was the start of the 70th week. Chapter 7 is the end of the 70th week, and therefore the rapture is right there. Therefore, it's a post-trib view. In this next slide, what I'd like for you to notice is the scenario for what's called the mid-trib view, and also referred to as pre-wrath. So let's take a look at that. In this mid-trib view, you'll also see that the 69 weeks of years on the left, you'll see the church age, and then you'll see the white arrow indicating the 7-year 70th week of Daniel, which is the trib or tribulation. But it does have the seals, trumpets, and bowls in the correct order unfolding at the same time. But you'll notice that these in sequence now also happen within the confines of the 7-year, 70th week of Daniel. So they base their 70th week starting with the white horse rider. And the white horse rider then marks the arrival of their Antichrist. And so therefore they'll get to the end of the seals and they'll see a raptured multitude in chapter 7 and they'll say, aha, see, we're at the midpoint of the 70th week or somewhere along within the 70th week, and therefore before the wrath of God is released. And this is also known as the pre-wrath view because the rapture occurs before the wrath begins with the trumpets. Now there are some variations in the so-called mid-trib view or pre-wrath view in that some place it further along the timeline in somewhere amongst the trumpets. But you get the basic idea that the seals, trumpets, and bowls are kept in sequential order. However, they're limited to only 7 years for the entirety of them to play out. And you also notice that the pre-trib, the mid-trib, and the post-trib all base the start of the 70th week on the white horse rider, who they presume, without any kind of challenge, that the white horse rider is the Antichrist. So the next view I'd like to present is what I call the pre-trumpets view. Now the pre-trumpets view is what I came up with on my own. I was studying Chuck Missler's materials through Koinonia Institute, which is a fantastic program. And Chuck Missler is a dear saint in God, and God rest his soul, he's with the Lord now. And in his masterpiece program, Learn the Bible in 24 Hours, which is one of the courses that you take when going for your bronze medallion at the Koinonia Institute, during this course, when he reaches chapter 7 of Revelation, there's basically two parts. There's the part where you have the 144,000 of Israel who are sealed, and they end up going later on into the tribulation, the 70th week. Prior to the 70th week, actually, they're mentioned, and then they're also mentioned again. But when it comes to the uncountable multitude standing before the throne of God, and they're from every tribe, nation, language, and tongue, and they're proclaiming salvation, in his masterpiece program, Learn the Bible in 24 Hours, Chuck Missler skipped this. And I just could not comprehend why such a brilliant scholar of the Bible in a masterpiece program such as that would skip something that we're all looking for. We're all looking for that particular event. If we imagine the rapture in our minds, what is it going to be like? The second part of chapter 7 is exactly what it would look like. And so it put a big, huge X on the treasure map for me. And that's where I've been digging for the past, 10 years, I guess, close to 10 years. And just trying to figure out what is this all about. And what it's done is it's caused me to take a real close look at the book of Revelation. And again, going through an outline, looking at things and reading it as it is and keeping it as it is. I've come up with this view. And so this view, let's take a look, is you can see that we have the 69 weeks of years to the left and then the church age. And then we have the seals running concurrently with the church age. And then the trumpets in yellow, and then the bowls. Above the seals, we have a new arrow called the beginning of sorrows. Now, Jesus talked about the beginning of sorrows in his Olivet discourses, Luke 21, Matthew 24. And we'll find out later that a lot of these things that happen in the seals actually parallel and describe quite well the things that we see happening in the seals, and also too what we see happening in the world right now. So when we get to the end of the seals, we see the blue arrow, which is the rapture in chapter 7, and then the beginning of sorrows goes all the way down to that character down there. That's an angel from a pit, and that's Apollyon. And then Apollyon begins the 70th week, and about that time, we see the temple being constructed and built. And then the 70th week continues on through and we see the bowls unfolding, and at the very end we see the second coming in the millennium. So I know that's quite a bit to deal with, and that's quite a bit to digest. It's going to go against a lot of people's view. In fact, it goes against all three views. But when you consider what we've covered so far, we've covered the fact that the seals, trumpets, and bowls are in sequential order. The trumpets are reinforced with the three woes. We have the metatautas. We have the after these things. We have the roadmap rivets, if you will. And we have all the occurrences of the word then. The third video, which addresses the idea of who is the best candidate for the Antichrist based on the criteria that the Antichrist is known to do. And so we find that it's not the white horse rider that's the Antichrist. It's very likely the character known as Apollyon, who comes in at the fifth trumpet in the chapter 9 of Revelation. Now, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to accept this. A lot of people have been taught for a long time that the Revelation is not the way it actually is written. They've been taught that it is happening in a very short period of time. Well, if you look at the first three chapters, particularly the second chapter and the third chapter, the letters to the churches, the church age itself has lasted about 2,000 years. So the book covers a much longer period of time than most people realize. So what they've done is they've opened up the book and they've come to the view of heaven and they want to be raptured out. And who doesn't? Okay, I want everybody, no matter what your rapture view is to be gone in the rapture. I don't want anybody to go through the 70th week. It's not going to be a picnic, folks. It's going to be a very tough time for everyone. A lot of people won't live through it. And if you think that you will, you're probably sadly mistaken, because things are not going to be the way we think they are going to be. When we see these things playing out, as we see in the beginning of sorrows, which the pre-trumpets view incorporates. The beginning of sorrows are things that mankind does to one another. And we can see these things happening in the world now. We see things being conquered so that Israel is going to be standing alone. We see the red horse, which I think is the Arab Spring. We see the economic collapse. And again, we're on the verge of some very bad economic situations around the world, and it's only going to get worse. And then there's death from a lot of different things. You know, just the fact that there's an economic collapse and people won't be able to access the medicines that keep them alive, that's why it says that death will be the cause of death. So we see these things happening, and even martyrdom. Martyrdom is not wrath of God. Martyrdom is people's wrath against God, and it's particularly God's people who are speaking about God. And then we see the things that happen in the sixth seal. Now these things are going to be very strange, and we don't know exactly what they are going to be. We got some ideas, but it's all speculation at this point. The point being is that if you have a pre, mid, or post-rapture scenario view, then you're waiting on the Antichrist. You're not waiting for what Jesus says to do, and that's be ready. Endure to the end. Have extra oil in your lamp. Don't be like the five foolish. Half of the people that he talked about in that example were not prepared. And so if you have a view that doesn't allow you to be prepared, if you have a view that says, oh, any minute now, without any kind of warning, without any kind of indication, we're just going to all disappear and we don't have to worry about anything, I don't think that's a safe play. I think it's a better idea to be aware, have your head up, looking around and saying, hey, maybe I need to, put a little food aside. Maybe I need a little cash aside if I can. Maybe I need to set some bottled water aside and have some medicine set aside. Who knows? If there's an injury, you may not be able to get to a doctor. You may not be able to get medical assistance, a basic first aid kit. And I'm not telling people what to do and what not to do for be a prepper, but if you're so inclined, then it would be a good thing to do, because we're supposed to have extra to go through the long dark night ahead. And if we're in the beginning of sorrows, then we're going to see some tough things coming our way. And it's not the wrath of God. It's the wrath of mankind against God's people. And this is only going to get worse. So all I can say is be ready. And, I'd like for you to study these things. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But do it scripturally. Consider it. Challenge the fact that whether or not the white horse rider is the Antichrist. Study to see if these things are in order. I've studied it for a long time, and this is what I've come up with. And I would hope that you would see it and maybe come to the same conclusion I have. And I pray that each one of us has a teachable spirit from God, so that we can learn and we can encourage each other, and we can say, hey, you know what? Times are tough, and we don't have to say, oh, where's God? He's abandoned us. No, he hasn't abandoned us. He's told us we're going to go through some stuff. And if we're ready for it, then we can endure, and we'll understand, and we'll know, and we'll have confidence that we don't have to worry. And we don't have to, there may be some people that abandon their faith, and we don't want that. We want everybody to be faithful to God and to be true. So study these things and see for yourself. I encourage everyone to go back and do a screen grab of each of these slides that I presented. And when you do, take the time, look them over, see what you think, compare it to the scripture and see what you think. Now, before I finish up here, what I'd like to talk to you about is something that I discovered that I thought was pretty cool. Jesus said in Luke chapter 21, verse 36, he said, "Watch therefore, and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." So when we turn to Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, we read, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.'" They're all going, "Hoorah, we're saved, yay!" That's where I want to be. So anyway, the point that I wanted to make here is that Jesus said, pray always that you be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. It's interesting when you read how it says escape all these things. Escape all can have two different meanings. It can mean not experience anything, and it can equally mean not experience everything. For example, if you were to take a test and you had 10 questions on the test, and you go ahead and you sign your name on the test, and you answer the first question, and I come by and I pick up the piece of paper and I say, okay, you've passed, you don't have to take the rest of the test, go on your way. So you have escaped all. Now, if you didn't take any of the test, you've also escaped all. So escape all can mean not experience anything, and it can equally mean not experience everything. So I think in this, what this means, and a lot of people read this and they think, oh, well, we're not going to experience anything. I happen to believe that it means we're not going to experience everything. And I think it's confirmed in Revelation 7, 9, and 10. Chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. And this is where all these people are standing before. Well, what did he say? He said, pray always that you will be counted worthy to escape these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Well, here's all this multitude in chapter 7, and they are standing before the Lamb of God, which is the Son of Man. And they're all crying out salvation. They're counted worthy. We find out later that these people have their robes washed in the blood of the Lamb and made white in that blood. So we have a confirmation that this is an escaping all. And that escaping all means they don't experience everything. They experience some things. But as we can see from the way the structure of the book is laid out, they've experienced the seals of the scroll, but they don't experience the trumpets and the bowls. What's really interesting about these two verses is that one is a prophecy, the other is a fulfillment of the prophecy. And there are 4 common elements to each. And we can see that these two are directly related. The first is that we are to pray always that we be counted worthy. And in chapter 7, we see that this multitude is worthy because they've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. The second element is to escape all these things. And as I showed, escape all can mean not experience anything, or it can equally mean not experience everything. And because of the location of this occurrence in the Revelation, this multitude has experienced some things, but does not experience everything, because there's much more of the book to come after this, after these things, and metatauta. And then the next thing is to stand before. And that's a common element in Revelation 7:9. This multitude is standing before. And they're standing before the Son of Man, which is also the Lamb of God. Now, what makes this interesting is that there's only 2 places in the entire Bible with these 4 common elements, and these are the 2 places. Luke 21:36 and Revelation 7:9 and 10 are directly linked. One is a prophecy by Jesus. The second is the fulfillment of the prophecy and where we want to be. So in closing, I'd just like to add that there is a lot of argument, a lot of hostility, a lot of name calling, a lot of bitterness between the pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib scenarios. People are not being nice, they're not being godly, they're not being Christian, and I know in their heart of hearts they really don't want to be angry. They don't want to be at each other's throats. There's got to be a solution to this. All 3 are claiming each other is wrong. But consider this, they're all 3 basing their views on the same character. They're basing their view on the white horse rider being the Antichrist. And hopefully I've demonstrated that the white horse rider is not the Antichrist. So I strongly suggest that people examine their own views. They challenge the premises that their views are based on, and hit the books. Get back to the actual word. Humble yourself. Instead of trying to make it say what you want it to say, let it tell you what it actually says. And don't take my word for it. Look for yourself. Consider what I've said, sure, but be like the Bereans in that they received it with all willingness, and that's the hard part. But they also checked the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So it's a 2-part thing. You have to receive with willingness, which means you may have to give up something that you've been totally invested in before. And that makes me wonder, some of these preachers that are out there that are selling books and videos and everything, they've written stories and movies and all this stuff based on a scenario that isn't true. And a lot of people have treated these things as truth when in fact they haven't challenged it, they haven't questioned it, they haven't examined it for themselves to find out if these things are true. So all I can say is the pre-trumpets rapture scenario is offered as a possibility to end the hostilities. When everybody examines their own view and challenges their own view, not the views of others, challenge your own view first. See if it holds up. And if it doesn't, then consider the pre-trumpet scenario. It's an alternative that I think will be very satisfying to people when they finally come around to it. And hopefully it'll make the world a more peaceful place, especially within the church. So with that, I'd like to say good night, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.